Welcome to the June 2nd, 2020 community call. We're actually doing a quick build recap on this one. I had a lot of feedback that although build was 2 weeks ago now, not everyone could make the sessions because they were busy at work or had other commitments. And people wanted to know how the best way was to tap into all that amazing content that was presented live, but also available on demand. So I'm going to walk through and highlight the best bits of that, and to just point out where you can go watch all the on-demand videos to make that the most easiest for you to kind of get up to speed with everything that was announced, not just from a Microsoft Graph perspective, but also from a Microsoft 365 in general perspective as well. So I'm Jeremy Thake. I've been hosting the community call for a few years now, and I have with me Bettirose. Betty, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, so hi everyone. My name is Bettirose Ngugi. I am a program manager based out of Nairobi, and I own the Graph Explorer.
Thank you, Betty. I'm really excited to see you showcase all this stuff because I know you and the team have been working really hard to get this out there for build, and it was just awesome to see that kind of over the year grow into what it is today. And so, yeah, I'm really pumped to see that come through. So I just want to do a quick build recap, and the easiest way to do this is to essentially share my actual screen. But in the slide deck, I've put some key slides just to highlight, the most common links. So the first one that we've got here is just the main Microsoft Graph website. So the easiest way to get there is, well, this URL if you can remember it, but also graph.microsoft.com is definitely the best way to get there. You'll see that we have a nice little promotion for the new Graph Explorer is now GA, is generally available. And you'll find that when you explore the website that this rotation does change usually every month and drives you to new areas we'd like you to try and go explore. But also you'll notice that we have our blog posts down here that point to all the new things we've announced through the Microsoft Graph blog. Now, this is probably the quickest way to get over to the blog by clicking View More. And you'll see all of the Microsoft Graph blog posts. Now, there is a broader blog that you can follow that incorporates this blog news. And the reason I bring this up is that not many people actually know about it. So if I go to developer.microsoft.com, Microsoft 365, that actually takes you to a broader all-up Microsoft 365 Dev Center. And this links to all the different videos across Microsoft Build. And you can see here that we link off to the sub areas. So Microsoft Graph site being one of those sub areas. If you look inside the resources, you can actually jump straight into the Microsoft Graph blog. And what this blog actually is a combination of the Microsoft Graph blog, the SharePoint blog, the Office Headings blog, and the Identity Platform blog, and the Windows blog as well. And so you'll see a lot of content in here. And I would recommend, if you're interested in the whole M365, is that you actually go to this blog rather than the Graph one, because you'll get our news as well as all the other news as well, which I think for most M365 developers, you're not just interested in our APIs, you're interested in building on our platform, and so M365 makes most sense. If I go back to the Microsoft Graph blog here, the key blog post that we write for each major event is authored and penned by Ben Summers, who's on the call. And for Build, it was the API to your organization, Microsoft Graph at Build. And so that is definitely solid reading. There are RSS feeds for the blog. I see someone asking there. And I think if you scroll down the bottom, you can see them on this RSS feed. So when you grab these, if you go put those into Feedly, they will work. Or you can kind of add Microsoft Flow and so forth. That was something I asked for really, really early on. So thank you for asking for that. It proves that the value of the project was here. And so as part of this announcement, we kind of called out the key topic areas as well as all of the new APIs we've announced. And you can kind of click through and link to all these things in the doc. So it's a really great way of exploring all the news that happened at Build regarding the Microsoft Graph. So definitely check that one out. And then the other area of focus, other than this blog post, is all of the videos. And so the key videos are in the Microsoft 365 YouTube channel. And these videos, if you scroll down a touch, you'll see there's a whole section here on Microsoft Build. And you can see they've been expanded out via various different categories, and you'll see that the Microsoft Graph and People-Centric Experience has a playlist there. And so you'll see here that we have 11 or so videos, and these videos will cover everything. Now, I will say I have a personal favorite, which I know is hard to do, having a favorite child. But my favorite video from Microsoft 365 and Microsoft Graph is the What's New with Microsoft Graph video. It's 30 minutes, and it encapsulates a lot of what was shown in the blog with demos of those APIs. So if you want one video, I'd highly recommend checking that particular What's New video out. And I think I even have it auto-muted so that it doesn't destroy this presentation. No, I definitely can't win that war, Joel. And so I would really encourage you to go check out those videos to get completely up to date with what's going on inside of Microsoft Graph. I've watched a lot of these actually in the downtime, and they're really kind of quick and succinct. You'll see a lot of them are 15 minutes, so you can really just consume them during lunch or as you're ramping up in the mornings. In addition to that, the sessions, Nicola and Beth and I, Nicola and Beth are from the Microsoft Graph Toolkit team. They actually helped build an application called the Moderator app inside of Microsoft Teams that heavily uses the Microsoft Graph. And this show we actually recorded over 3 hours on Twitch. I'd love any feedback on those that attended that or have consumed this on demand, on whether you think this was a good format for learning. We are interested in kind of doing this again in the future. Obviously, there's a bit of prep time in terms of building the app at first, and then like basically trashing the app and rebuilding it from scratch and explaining all those steps as we go through. With the on-demand, it's actually really nice because we've broken it up into the separate areas of those 3 hours. So if you're already comfortable with Azure AD and you're okay with Microsoft Graph Toolkit, you can kind of jump in and on video 4 and get going straight away, which is awesome. So definitely check out those videos. I will encourage you that if you go back to the Microsoft 3, you can see I'm subscribed, and you'll get all the alerts for all the new videos that come through. There are a ton of videos on development here from Teams, SharePoint, Graph, Office add-ins. This is where all the community call recordings go, Identity Platform, Windows Dev. This is definitely the best place to go to kind of keep up with everything that's happening in M365. I love this because I have my TV at home with my Apple TV, and I can just open the YouTube app and just pick a video and have that running while I'm cooking and so forth, which drives my wife nuts. So that's that. Now, a big shout out to Microsoft Graph Toolkit 2. They have a new series called the Microsoft Graph Lap Around Microsoft Graph Toolkit, and they're on day 8 as of yesterday, on June 1st. This blog series was inspired by the series that Brian Jackett drove, which was the 30 Days of Graph series. It was done over 18 months ago now. And Brian is now on our team and in this call. Brian, we'll be working with us on partner and customer success. So thank you for joining the team, and thanks for your work on the series, Brian. So that's awesome. And yeah, I'd encourage you to, if you haven't read the 30 Days of Graph, do that. And then if you're interested in the Microsoft Graph Toolkit, which we've had on this community call quite a few times now, this lap around really introduces you to everything that's happening in the Graph Toolkit and kind of steps you through all the different things you can do to learn about the Microsoft Graph Toolkit too. And then lastly, if you go over to GitHub, what you'll see is that we have actually open sourced that moderator sample that we built in React. It used the new Microsoft Teams Visual Studio Code extension that was announced at Build as well. So the video showed you how we kind of plugged in, made a React web app, a Microsoft Teams app, and then plugged in the graph and got this thing working end to end. So definitely go check that out if you have time. So with that, I will just jump back to slides. And so you can see in the slide deck, I've put the main links in here. They are in the chat window, which I know will not be on the video recording, and the AKS dev link for the show and the GitHub videos, and the lap around the Microsoft Graph Toolkit. So with that, I will hand over to Bettirose just in time and let you see everything about the new Microsoft Graph Explorer.
Thank you, Jeremy. Hi, everyone. So my name is Bettirose Ngugi. I am a PM based out of Nairobi, Kenya. I own the Microsoft Graph Explorer, which is the tool that we just launched the new version of it. And I hoped I could take some time during this call to just show you some of the features that we have created. So As you can see, it's a brand new look from the UI, and that's the first thing. We built it using React Redux framework. And one of the things we thought about when we are creating this is the ease of getting things such as permissions. So before, in the old Graph Explorer, a user needed to know the permissions that you require to run a query. But right now, if you just type in a query over here, it's able to show you the permissions that you require. But if you actually know the permissions that you already need, you will find we have implemented a new way to see the list of all the permissions, and that list you will find it on this tab over here, where you can click on select permissions, and it will open for you all the permissions, and you can select the ones you want and consent to them if that's what if those are the permissions you already know. So this means you are taking care of the users who are novice and don't know the permissions they require, as well as taking care of the users who already know the permissions that they already require. The second thing we thought about is the access token. And a lot of users wanted to know or to pick this token to use it in their favorite REST API client. So you can actually come here and pick your token, copy it, and use it wherever you want to use it. The third thing is we have this tab here called the adaptive cards. We are actually in the process of adding more value to this tab. It's supposed to show you like the kind of cards that you can get from the adaptive cards framework. And we are supposed to create a new tab to show you the code we used to show this. So this is still on preview at the moment. The next one is the code snippets. And the code snippets gives you like some code snippets that you can use to write, like depending on the query that you have over here, it's able to give you the code that you require to put this in your application. And at the moment, we are supporting 4 programming languages: C#, JavaScript, Java, and Objective-C. We have gotten feedback from community that we also need PowerShell SDK added over here. So we are working towards adding code snippets for PowerShell as well, and also for Python, because it's also an SDK we are currently working on. The next thing is this tab here. You will see we already have enabled change of themes. So if you want to see like a dark theme, a light theme, or a high contrast theme, you'll see that is also enabled. We still have a bit of bugs, and we have these reported, and we're actually working on them. An example, if you change the theme over here, you will see the access token, you can't see it. So this is known issues that we are already currently working on. And if you find any other issues, please feel free to report them on our GitHub repo. We have this history tab over here. And one of the things we took care of is you can actually download your history and such kind of things. Or if you want to download a specific history, you just come here and export it, and you will get that specific history. You can also view, you can delete, and we've gotten feedback to work on this. Like when you click over here, it's supposed to give you the query that you clicked. That when you click on a history item, it should actually like copy it over here. So the next thing is we have this link over here that takes you to the Office Dev program. On it takes you to that Office Dev program. We have plans to integrate the two programs so that if you're logged in on this side, it logs you onto your tenant on that other side. Then some UI features such as like you can collapse the sidebar, you can increase the response view to see it, and we have also gotten feedback that it's better to also allow someone to resize the response as they wish. So that is also on the plan. And then if you look at the history, the samples, we are showing them, all of them on this side. So, and then we have this share link button over here, which was also on the previous one. So you can share like the query you have, and it will go with the request headers and request bodies that are already on your query. So as I conclude, I would like to invite everyone.
So what Betty was about to say was we're really looking for feedback on Graph Explorer. I shared the link to the GitHub issues that essentially have all of the current issues that we have in the product, as well as all of the feature requests that we've gotten over time that we want to work on. And we wanted to start to get an idea about what features we want to prioritize next for Graph Explorer once we kind of overcome some of the issues, bugs that we have within the product. And so we have a GE feedback at Microsoft.com DL that Betty is interested in having 30-minute calls directly with individuals to share experience with how they use Graph Explorer themselves within Microsoft. But we also wanted to open the forum today, and if we could use the put your hands up feature or using a hands emoji icon in the chat window, we can just kind of ask people to open up their mic so they can give their feedback to us on this call right now. So did anyone have any specific feedback to the Microsoft Graph Explorer right now based on what you've seen or what you've used in the past? And I'm hoping that Betty at least has audio so that she can hear you during this call.
Yes, I'm back.
Phew.
We do have two people that raised their hands.
Yeah, recently I use Graph Explorer on the daily basis, and I happen to know there was a new version while I'm using it. So, and the old version now we could just do the GET request. Is that going to slowly go away? And I still like the green color one. I know she showed the dark mode and white mode, but what's going to happen with the old version? And then is it only GET request on the old version? Is it going to go? I like the old version, but then again, the new version has code snippets, adaptive cards, a lot of other resources. So
I think Betty is still having issues with her microphone. The new version replaced completely the old version on Graph Explorer. When you go to graph.microsoft.com, you access the new version right away that Betty was demonstrating.
I see. Okay. No, that makes sense. The new version has a lot of resources. I like it.
Is there anything that has changed that is making your life more difficult with the new version?
No.
Or is it just a matter of getting used to it? Because it's
No, for first few days, I was like, why can't I do post request or patch request? But then once I switch the sign with the new to old to new, I see that okay, so it's a new version, and then I see that access token resource and adaptive cards, even code snippets. So that's really useful, and then I'm looking forward for other features.
Excellent. Cool.
And also internally, we also had Sukanta Majumdar that had his hand risen.
I'm curious about, I quite often, I don't personally use Graph too much. Yes, other than being aware of it, my customers, I'm helping some of my customers quite a bit, and they use the beta features. I personally am curious, do we have visibility how long it takes for beta features to move from beta to release version? Is there a way to know? What is the best way to answer those type of questions?
So that's a question that's a bit outside of the focus point right now. But to answer it, I guess the best place to know and be notified of any progress of any feature in Microsoft Graph would be to go to microsoftgraph.uservoice.com. And there you have all the ideas and suggestions that people have suggested with time. And the product teams that work on the different features, either the new APIs or the platform broad features, are supposed to go there and update the different ideas. So not only voting each and every idea that you're interested in will help us prioritize the work internally, but it will also notify you when any progress is made. So for example, if something moves from, I don't know, private preview to beta and then beta to V1, every time an update is made there, you'll get an email notification. Another place you could check as well is the Microsoft 365 roadmap, which is where, or as well as the changelog in the docs, I can see Jeremy moving as well. So the roadmap is where you'll see features, not just Microsoft Graph features, but features at large in Microsoft 365 being updated in terms of when they're supposed to land in which quarter. And the changelog is where you see all the new changes that have landed, that have made their way to either beta or V1 being listed out. So those are the three places where I would go to know where is something at in terms of delivery and when it's going to land and all those kind of things. And to answer the question about how long does it make to go from beta to V1, it really depends from feature to feature. As we collect feedback, we might see that something needs more or less rework than we anticipated. So again, it's very hard to estimate how long it will take to go from beta to V1 from a feature to another one, because it really depends on a case-by-case basis.
Right, and let me just add really quickly to that, Vincent. This is Ben Summers. Is that we're actually working a lot right now on making sure that the Microsoft 365 roadmap that Vincent's showing here is a location that reflects sort of the true plan of record for Microsoft Graph feature updates, both beta and generally available updates. So please do use that as a reference point.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
I will add from the user voice perspective, if there are things that you're interested in, obviously this is definitely very important right now to a lot of people, is by logging in, and you can use your Microsoft account here and voting. If this status changes, you'll be notified by user voice that status has changed. So it's definitely a good way to keep up to date with things, and why we encourage you to create these user voice requests in the first place, because PMs will jump in here and update it, and you will get those notifications.
And thank you, Jeremy. And we had a third question from Todd Clint. Todd, if you can go unmute yourself and ask your question.
Sure. Hey, everybody. So first off, just want to reiterate how excited I am to see the PowerShell support coming for the code snippets. That's a big thing. I am not a developer, so I'm I'm an IT pro. And so earlier when they were asking what enhancements we would like to see in the graph, I use the graph a lot just for kind of prototyping to see what's there so that I can tell other people to write code around it, because I'm not a developer. But the biggest problem that I have with the graph, and that people like myself, non-developers, is the permissions part. So it's helpful to know when we don't have permissions, but I've not seen anything yet that tells me which permission I would need to do the query that I'm trying to do, which is the thing that's always a sticking point. So then I end up giving myself what I think is the permissions, or all the permissions, to figure out what the output looks like. So anything that can help with saying, you're trying to read everybody's presence, but you don't have, user read all or whatever.
Yeah.
That's
Thanks, Todd. And this is a common thing that comes up, and something we introduced into docs a while ago, where in the API reference, when you're inside of the docs, for everything you see here on the table of contents, these are the API operations. So obviously get user is just user with the user ID. And in the permission section that's at the top, you'll see what permission scopes are required with least privileged to most privileged for either the delegated with a work or school account, delegated with a personal account like your Outlook account, or running as an application, so app only, daemon account, service account type approach. And so this will give you the focus on what you can use to actually run this. We do have a full permissions page. So if you click on that link here, this will actually take you to a nice little video that explains in a little bit more detail. And for every single thing, we actually list all of these here. So for instance, if you wanted to know what user.read has the capability to do, you can use the browser search right now. And we're going to improve this page so that it can pivot on this. Is you can go see all the different areas that user.read would actually work with across the board. And so this is just another way of exploring it, and we're working on additional ways to make that easier, that like for user.read, what it actually allows you to do across the whole kind of gamut of Microsoft Graph as well. Does that answer your question, Todd, or am I missing part of the context?
No, so that's good. I wish it were less tough to find, less control effing, more inside of the Graph Explorer or wherever. And I have the same problem with the SDK. Because again, I don't live in this, so every time I come in, I got to remind myself how this all works, and now I've got like 3 web pages, and this is a step in the right direction. I don't want to see it great.
So the use case you're asking is like, I want to use user read, but I want to know what everything the user read entails, so that I'm aware of the scope.
No, I want to know why I can't use it. So I log in and I don't do the permissions thing right because I don't do the graph all the time, and I can't use user read, or I can't get my own presence, and I don't know why. And what I want is a very simple dialog box that says you need this exact permission, so that I can log out, log back in, and consent and all that.
Yeah, and the bit that Betty demonstrated here was the modify permissions section. That essentially, for whatever you've written up here, if you click on this, it'll tell you exactly what they are, and it will tell you what things you're like. For instance, what I have, I'm not signed in. If I sign in here with my demo account, it'll actually show me, if I refresh the screen, it'll show me that for this user, I'm signed into Graph Explorer for /me, that I've consented this thing, so this will actually work. But I could have also consented these permission strings and made it work as well. But if I went to something that I haven't used, if I run this right now, it'll give me a forbidden. So then you'll see in the modify permissions tab, I need sites read all to run the items trending around me. I can click consent here. And what it's actually going to do is do the same flow your application would do, which is saying, hey, look, Jeremy, for Graph Explorer, we need to add this permission and accept it. And so now when you accept it, the UI will now essentially update, and then I'll be able to run it and get the values back. Now, it did me a 200. I don't have anything trending around me because this account is basically a ghost. It's not being used. So it wasn't the best example of getting data back.
No, that's perfect. So is that new in the new Explorer?
It is new in the new Graph Explorer, yeah. So the modified permissions is your friend.
Yes.
This is much better.
Yeah, that's exactly the thing that I was looking for. So,
okay, perfect.
So we had one question.
Hi, thanks. So my use case for Graph is, so I can look at the documentation all day, but it can't help me find site or drive or list IDs and whatnot. So usually I'll go onto Graph Explorer and just kind of like list through and see what IDs I'm looking for so that I can implement it in my code. Is there an easier way to go about finding IDs for what I'm looking for?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's something we've been noodling, especially when we're doing demos and so forth. One thing we added in the docs, if I jump back into the API reference, and we can use sites as an example here. If I go into like get lists, for instance, and we can see that to get the lists, we need to know like the site ID and the list ID. And I don't know if you've noticed, but we actually have try it buttons for all our get examples right now, which when you run that will actually execute Graph Explorer. And so you can see also what we've added now is the ability to sign in directly in this experience. Now in this example, it's actually pasted in a list ID from this sample, but it's tokenized this. So this won't work without knowing what the site ID is. And so there's some exploration work we're doing right now, which would allow us to kind of suggest site IDs from your tenant if you were actually signed in here. So I can go sign in as Jeremy in this profile. And now my mini Graph Explorer within a try it will actually kind of have that context. We don't have that feature right now, but the idea of being able to click here and pick from a list of site collections that are within your tenant, and then also then pick here, we feel would make that experience better. Is that the typical, is that the kind of flow that you're looking for?
Yeah, I can imagine that. It kind of reminds me of Power Automate and how it enumerates stuff like that.
So you will have noticed maybe in the new Graph Explorer, we don't yet have the autocomplete capability. And there was a limited autocomplete in the old version of Graph Explorer where when you were typing the URL, sometimes it would suggest other things that you would be able to do. We have significantly improved that capability. It just didn't quite make it into our build release. So going forward, we are going to be able to not only suggest path segments, but also query parameters and query parameter values. And part of that larger work, we can potentially expand that to be able to do suggestion of ID values as well.
Sounds great. Thanks.
For the last question.
I just wanted to give a little bit of feedback on the Graph Explorer. I think it's a wonderful tool. The only comment I have is that I think it seems to me, based on scouring through documentation and stuff, the primary use case for Graph, the technology, and the Graph Explorer is for delegated permissions. I might incorrectly be assuming that, but I think there is a huge amount of power and utility in using the Graph Explorer, not in a delegated permission style, but with client credentials and application permissions and multi-tenant apps, and all this really cool stuff you can do to make connecting to organizations very, very useful. And I just wanted to comment that as a developer that primarily uses Graph, the technology for client credentials and application permissions, I usually find it really hard to find what I'm looking for in the Graph Explorer, and I rarely go to it because I have to know exactly what call I'm looking for beforehand. And specifically, there's nothing, all of these little example calls on the left, I don't think I've found a single one that uses application permissions. They're all delegated permission calls. I could just be wrong. I might just have missed something, but it would be really cool to see some links or even some options or some toggles that explain, here's application permissions, here is multi-tenant apps and what they can do. I think there's a lot of power to be had inside of Graph, and I just don't know if the Graph Explorer is really showcasing all of that.
Yeah, I can take that. We have done a lot of thinking around how do we expose application permissions, and we've had mock-ups of how we can potentially allow you to bring your own app ID. Obviously, we can't. Well, we might be able to do something for a demo tenant, but obviously we have no way of doing app-only permissions for your tenant unless you actually bring us your own app ID and your own client credential. And then you actually have to give us that client credential to enable it. So it brings in a whole bunch of security-related issues. So it very much is something that we've considered. I really appreciate you pushing us on that, because knowing that there are customers who are explicitly looking for that scenario helps us prioritize the feature. We definitely would like to add those scenarios because we realize that they are a big part of the Graph. We just haven't found the right way to do it securely yet.
Well, I think you guys are actually a little bit further than you might think, though, because I've used the Graph Explorer for maybe I'm misexplaining what I'm looking for here. So I think the difference is just between /me and /users, because when it comes to the actual calls to Graph, obviously there's a lot of, Microsoft Identity Platform and stuff you have to do, like you said, that could cause security problems. But in terms of just the Graph calls themselves, I know a lot of them, like if I want to get a user, instead of a /me, it's just /user ID. And at least in the older version of Graph Explorer, I was able to, with a signed in account, where I had granted the application permissions on the Azure tenant or whatever, I was able to do a /users call and it worked correctly.
Well,
but
sure,
there weren't any examples or things explaining that, what it was or why it was useful, etc.
I see. And yes, you absolutely can hit whack users with delegated permissions. And there are many things that are not specific to a particular user that you can access. And you're right, discovery is limited at the moment to the samples. It will get better with the added autocomplete that we are working from the URI, and we have some other things that we are experimenting, prototyping with regards to making it overall easier to discover all of the different things that are on the Graph, whether you consider them like personal information or organizational information. So feedback is well received, and we definitely are thinking in that direction to enable those kind of scenarios more.
And part of the reason we put the try in there as well was so that if you wanted to explore through the docs and like, this is how I got list messages, and be able to click on the try here, is that's another way to navigate you through to kind of play with these things. You can see I got the access denied, so I'd need to go in and modify those permissions. And we have some layout bugs at the 1080p resolution, which I'm sharing my screen at, to be able to see that. But the idea being is that I could consent from here and get that particular query working. And so, you can use this way of navigating at the top level of what workload am I interested in and get down to the operation and try it here. I totally hear you on the broad stroke of Graph Explorer being kind of the samples are scoped to whatever we've decided to make as samples. So definitely kind of get you on that one. The other thing I wanted to bring up was we do have Postman. So if you go into our Graph docs and in the use the API section here, you'll see there's a use Postman section. We have a GitHub collection and there's a video there which I did and steps on how you import it. And essentially this will give you delegated the same as Graph Explorer, but it'll also give you application permissions as well. And so we've kind of given you all the little configurations to be able to get that going with app only. And so I personally use Postman to kind of validate APIs when I get questions. And I'll even like save my own custom collections for demos when I'm showing to partners and customers too. So I do find this Postman super useful, and that's a free tool. And as I say, the collection's open source, and there's people on this call like Vincent that have contributed a fair amount of additional examples into this collection that you can just pull down by following these steps here.
Thank you, guys. That's awesome. Thank you for listening to feedback. That's really cool. Not a lot of teams do that. And also, this Postman things look really, really sweet, and I had no idea it existed because it's kind of hidden in the docs here. I think that would be an awesome link to throw in your Graph Explorer. Just say prefer Postman, and then take you right to this page, because that is, what is that? Is that like 121 sample requests that I'm seeing on that picture?
Yeah, they're folders too. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah, the screenshot, you can actually see how many we got in there. Yeah, that's right. Thank you, Scarlett.
Personal request, please put that on the Graph Explorer page.
It actually is like our third most hit blog post of all time where we announced this. So that is a fair point that we could promote this from Graph Explorer for app only usage. That is a good suggestion. And I hear you totally on that. It's buried in the develop user APIs use Postman section.
And just to add one more thing with regards to this new version of Graph Explorer, whilst we've added a lot of front-facing features, we also have made a bunch of changes on the back end too. In the past, for teams, when they wanted to add samples, they had to come to our Git repo, pull down the source code, do a PR against our source code. So adding new samples for the various teams was not nearly so easy. We've actually moved that into a Backend API now and are building tooling so that it will be much easier for the different teams who own the APIs to be able to add additional samples. So we're trying to reduce friction so that more samples can be added to Graph Explorer for the API teams.
Sweet. Thank you guys so much.
You're welcome. Thanks for the feedback. It's great. All this really helps us to validate. I mean, we're right in the middle of a planning cycle for we're in manganese right now. We're about to move into iron, which will start in July till December. And so having all these feature requests like really nailed down on priority really helps us to plan what we do next. So this is why we're doing this call like this. It's a little bit more of an open format, but it really just helps us if you guys can share that type of stuff. So already a few great ideas in here, so this is awesome. Sean, can't wait for the autocomplete feature to be implemented again. It was decent before, and improvement sounds nice. Yeah, I personally missed that as well, so it'll be good to get that back. Andres, hi Andres. We don't have an API to ask what rights the user has. We can only guess or test the hard way. Darryl, was there work we were looking to do in the SDKs to kind of handle that a little bit?
Yes. Graph Explorer does use an API to discover what those permissions are.
Right.
And we are hoping to leverage that information in other places around. We don't broadly advertise that API because we need to do additional work to make it fully public ready. But there is an API there.
But it's there, and if you want to go find it, I mean, the graphics, this whole UI is open source in that GitHub repo we shared, so you can get creative and look in here. But yeah, as you say, Daryl, we are trying to make sure that we, do some smarts here amongst other things too. Okay.
I have an additional question.
Hello. Okay, my question to you guys, we just wanted to know if there is any pricing or costing involved for calling these graph APIs.
Good question. So is there any pricing or costing? For now, essentially the only licensing cost associated with this would be if it's calling products that require specific licenses. So for instance, there are definitely a bunch of identity and access capabilities that will require you to have a particular SKU of identities plans. And so in those instances, they will have a label and a delocation on the documents to state that. Offhand, I can't remember exactly which ones are those ones that do that. And then the one I do remember is in the teamwork, in the beta API actually. For instance, there are new webhooks that require a particular plan in the future, but we haven't gone to V1 with that yet. And so I think even in marking that, Daryl, do you know where that is? I forget what webhook it is that they're, I think it's in chat messages.
Yeah, it's the chat webhook.
They'll be marked in the documents themselves when they require a particular license, like an E5 license or a P2 or P3 SKU of identity. So just bear that in mind. You'll see that in the docs as a note next to the API where that's highlighted. So Donnie,
okay. That is okay, but my question is to so if we use a basic graph API, for example, to send an email or to send a calendar invite, so in that case also, if there is nothing mentioned in that note or in that document, then it is not costing any pricing or it is not involved any cost, right? Or if you can have a separate document link where it shows, okay, these are the APIs where you will get to charge this much number of rupees or dollars, that would be much helpful for me.
Yeah, that's fair. Yep, we could definitely have something in the use your API around pricing to kind of point to all the ones that you have to be aware of for licensing. That's a good point. I'll make a note of that. Just so you know, like sending a mail, I mean, as long as you're sending it from a user that has a mailbox, they're paying for that mailbox, whether it's a E1, E3, E5 account. And so that's the only requirement there for that. But yeah, that's a valid point. And we'll think about how we could decorate the docs and have a one page that handles that. I will definitely take that offline.
But you can use the policy
thank
that
you
if
very
we
much.
let you call it, then we didn't charge you for it.
Right. Yeah.
Thank you very much. We do have last question from Josh.
Hey guys, thanks for setting all this up. I came in on the back half, so if you've already answered this question, please let me know and I'll look at the recording later. Do you have any updates on the Microsoft Graph PowerShell module, potentially when they might go GA or when you can start recommending folks use that on a regular basis?
Yeah.
We thoroughly encourage people to use it on a regular basis. We are aiming for GA this quarter.
Excellent. Thank you much.
I love PowerShell. I actually used it. Todd Clint's like, yay. And just big thank you for everyone's giving feedback with that PowerShell SDKs. It's been awesome to steer. And I've loved Daryl's approach to doing it as a PM as well. Like there's been a lot of stuff where we've had a fair few internal discussions and community voice has certainly helped with us making those decisions, which is great. Donnie, I'm curious about the heavy focus on REST calls versus implementing the SDK. Is the REST interface expected to be the major use case? I'm actually going to punt that to Daryl because Daryl's the best at kind of answering this question and he doesn't mind being thrown in the spot like this.
Yeah, our goal has been to build SDKs that make it a really easy choice of why would I do all of this work myself? I mean, if somebody absolutely has their own library for calling APIs and they already handle all the throttling situations and redirects and authentication, and they know exactly what they're doing and they've built it and whatever. But fine, you go ahead. We're not going to discourage you from doing that. However, if you're coming to the graph, we are building all kinds of capabilities into the SDKs to support throttling and redirects and being able to help you do batch requests. And we've got plans for bringing in caching and long-running operations and all kinds of other capabilities that we know you need to address on Graph. And what we don't want to do is to have every developer have to reinvent the wheel on those things. So we will continue treating this. It is an HTTP API where there's no plans from our side to hide this as an HTTP API. We will always continue documenting them as basic plain old HTTP calls, but then hopefully we will provide enough value in whatever language you want to use to make it a really easy choice to just go use the SDK. And the SDKs are also built with flexibility in mind. You can choose how much of it you want to use. If you just want to use the core library and don't want to pull in all of our generated types, that's perfectly fine too. That is a supported scenario. If you want the full experience where we will deserialize everything into strong types, then that's another option to you. And you should be able to plug and play and just choose the exact components that we provide without being tied into anything.
Yeah, that's as expected, solid answer. I will add that we, in some cases, like with the Microsoft Graph Toolkit, we even put another layer on top where essentially we're doing the identity provider calls with MSAL, we're making the graph calls with the Graph SDKs, and basically giving you the components. And so I saw the comments of like idiot proof in there. And so, I don't think anyone's an idiot on this call, but I do love the fact that how easy it is to get this stuff going, like just being able to add a signing component straight into my web app like we did in the live show with one line of code referencing a JavaScript package. And so, it just depends on what layer of the stack you want to go to. And we have different audiences and different spectrums of developers that are either wanting totally their hands held and just get things going really quick to wanting to work at that layer of rest and have their own kind of notions of how they want to handle things. And it just depends on what part of that spectrum you're in. So I definitely encourage you to check out our SDKs. And, it's the big reason why in all of our docs, if you look in our reference, things like list events, whenever you see our examples down the bottom, we're giving you the code that you can go copy and put in your application straight away. We lead with REST because it's kind of the most universal language, but we do encourage you via the docs to use those SDKs. And as people have asked, we will be putting PowerShell here at some point in the future as well. There is one question here around adaptive cards, and I'm pretty sure Betty's audio is hosed. I will answer on her behalf. So the adaptive cards aspect, we ship that in preview for build, and essentially when you run it, for various of these calls, the adaptive cards will show up and we're rendering those. What we don't have right now is a button that explains which adaptive card template that is using from the adaptive card library. So we do need to add a button here to do that. So just bear with us on that. This really is a preview feature we're exploring. We're measuring how many people are kind of going in here and even looking at it. But the idea being is that we have a way of correlating what the request is here and essentially what the data entity that's coming back is, and mapping that to an adaptive card template just to render it. And so you'll be able to then grab that template and do that same kind of logic yourself. And it's something that the Microsoft Graph Toolkit team are going to do as like a smart control as well. So, you'll be able to throw to the get web control of Graph Toolkit a query, and it will use the adaptive card template engine to kind of give you a first go at like, this is what we think we could render for you, rather than just kind of rendering back JSON. So that was one last quick one. And then I will just quickly scan here. Thank you, Betty, for answering questions in the chat. And yes, please. The developer program. This tenant came from a developer program, I believe. I don't know, I stole it from Nicola. But you can go sign up for one here, and you can obviously see in your dashboard your environment. As long as you're using it, it'll keep renewing. Please, I would not encourage you to use your production accounts with Graph Explorer. There are plenty of APIs here that will kind of do things you probably won't want to do in a production environment. And so we do encourage you to use your developer tenants and then sign in here on the left-hand side to those accounts. So with that, I will say thank you for all of your feedback. We really appreciate this, and we couldn't do our jobs without it. Banning blind and thinking of things that we think customers are going to want is super hard. Sometimes what we want isn't what you want. And so I really appreciate, and we all do, you jumping on the call this morning to give that feedback. Please keep it coming. Betty had the email address of gfeedback@microsoft.com if you would like to meet with her one-on-one. And then if you are finding issues or want to report a feature request there, you can use this GitHub issues link from the Microsoft Graph organization within GitHub. It is Graph Explorer v4. That is the version of this new experience we have. And that would be where we'd like to report those issues. It's also a place you can go and see if the issue you're experiencing has already been occurring already. And we would love you to chime in and just say, hey, look, we're still getting that issue, or we're experiencing it too, and here's the repo. It really helps us and our developers, engineers in the background, who are all with Betty in Nairobi in Kenya to work these things out. So the team would really appreciate that too. So with that, thank you again. Same time next month. It's the first Tuesday of the month at 8 a.m. PDT. And this on-demand recording will be in that YouTube channel, the Microsoft 365 Developer YouTube channel, where you can pull this down. So if you've got people who missed this that wanted to see it, you can point them to the video, and we'll announce the on-demand video on our blog, which I showcased it through the graph.microsoft.com website. So big thanks for everyone that chimed in, Betty, Daryl, Vincent, and all the guests kind of gave feedback. And sorry, Betty, that your audio wasn't working great, and hopefully you were able to listen while we kind of stepped in and was your voice while the call was happening. And see you again next month.